when you start cutting away, people start screaming.
Yes.
And yelling.
Yes.
And crying.
Yes.
And sometimes they are really in pain and sometimes they're not. It's very difficult to separate out who is going to really be hurt and who is really just pretending.
Yes.
And there comes a point where you are whittling down. I was looking at the budget. Okay, got 750 million here, 500 million there. All of a sudden, you're down to 100 million here, and maybe 50 million. Where do you stop when you're trying to make tracks? How far down do you go? Do you worry about the $1 million jobs, the saving $1 million here and there? Because by the time you've tried to do 100 of those $1 million savings, the time you spend on that could be spent on doing one $100 million savings. So, kind of, have you got help in looking for where money can be paired?
Well, the way that's a good question. The way I approach it, I don't try to look at it in terms of how much can we cut here. I look at it in terms of where are the inefficiencies. I'll give you an example. This year, probably next year, if we don't do something about it, we're going to have 900,000 visits paid for by taxpayers to our emergency rooms for routine care. It's costs 5 times more to treat a person in an ER than it does in the private sector, in a private clinic. Other states are doing something about that. We're not doing anything about that. It's costing us money. That's an inefficiency.
So there are going to be 900,000 emergency room visits for
routine care, for non-emergencies. Now, if somebody has an emergency, even if you don't have the money, get yourself to an ER. And we're not going to let anybody die because they don't have money. But if you don't have an emergency, whether you have insurance or not, then you need to go to a private clinic. And hospitals like Texas Children's in Texas, the University of Chicago affiliated hospitals, they become very aggressive. Ochsner is doing it here in Louisiana. They put certified community health care workers in every emergency room to intercept these patients, to saying, look, you really don't have an emergency, you don't want to be here, you don't want to have to wait, let us get you an appointment in the morning with a private clinic. That's better for them, and it's better for the taxpayer. But you've got to do something about the problem.
Okay, so then does the state still pay for that visit? We
would pay for the visit. Let's suppose a patient has Medicaid. We would pay for the visit to the private clinic. But that visit to the private clinic might cost $100, where the emergency room visit would cost $800.
Yeah.
And you can't blame people for trying to seek the care, but when they're seeking care in an ER, where it's very expensive, and they don't have an emergency, that's not good for them, it's not good for the taxpayer, and it's not good for the people who do have an emergency. It's a problem all across America. The difference is Louisiana's not doing much about it. Other states have gotten very aggressive in terms of trying to steer these folks to the right place. If we could eliminate those 900,000 visits to an ER for routine care every year just by 10%, just 10%, I think we could save between $50 million and $100 million. That's real money.
It is. You start adding those up and all of a sudden...
Yeah. Now, would I say stop at 50 to 100 million? No, I'd like to, that's an inefficiency. I'd like to reduce all those down to zero. Of course, we probably won't, but I would...
Now, that's 900,000 total visits or just non-emergency?
Non-emergency.
So those
numbers came from the Public Affairs Research Council.
They decided that 900,000
900,000 visits to an emergency room for routine care for non-emergencies.
Non-emergencies.
Yep.
That's amazing. What's the next biggest windmill you're going to tilt at?
Well, in terms of the budget, we have to do something about our cost of labor. No institution as large as state government can get control of spending without talking about cost of labor. We've got a lot of good state employees. This isn't about people. We've got really good people trapped in a broken system. We're #1 in the South and have been for 30 years in the number of jobs, state jobs, adjusted for population. Other states...
Something like 258 people per thousand?
That's exactly right. That's from the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can look it up yourself. We also have a big attrition rate. We have a 14 to 16% turnover every year. I have suggested that we not fill 1/3 of our vacancies this year. with a goal toward eliminating, not filling a third of the jobs that come open and eliminating those jobs. So no one's fired or laid off. If we do that for 3 years,
we've cut 14.
You'll save $500 million a year. Now, it's going to require the departments, many of them, to reorganize. They ought to reorganize anyway. The legislative auditor just finished a report. He found that 22% of all of the managers in Louisiana state government manage one employee. The average manager in Louisiana state government, according to the legislative auditor, manages 4 employees. We're very top-heavy. No business in the private sector could stay in business staffing that way. So we do have to reorganize. But we ought to do that whether times are good or bad. Some states, Texas is one, Iowa's another one, they just passed laws requiring a minimum span of control in state government of 1 manager for 10 employees. If they can do it, we can do it.
Taxes. Everyone's going to say, we got to raise taxes. They're screaming about raising taxes. Got to raise taxes, got to raise taxes. I don't believe in raising taxes. I think that when you give people tax relief, Ronald Reagan showed that give people tax relief, all of a sudden you're making way more money, embarrassingly much more money than the federal government thought they would be making. People are going to be calling again for raising taxes in Louisiana.
Yes.
So what if we go the other way, cutting taxes in Louisiana? Is there any prospect for?
Well, ultimately, I'd like to see us do that. I agree with you about not raising taxes. We have a very fragile economy. Yeah, we're in better shape than Michigan or California, but we're still not well. Raising taxes will hurt this fragile economy. We don't need to raise taxes. The current budget is $27 billion. Next year, we're going to have $25 billion. So you say, well, it's down $2 billion. That's true. But the budget 5 years ago for Louisiana was $19 billion.
I was saying, wasn't it just 10 years ago, $8 billion or something like that?
Yeah. So even with the reduction in revenues, we're still going to have $6 billion more next year than we had just 5 years ago.
Where is that money being spent?
Healthcare, higher education, our biggest expenditures, elementary and secondary education. The biggest expenditure, percentage-wise, though, is labor. We spend about $4 billion a year on direct salaries. When you add in the benefits, it's about $8 billion. And in 2008, here's part of the reason we got in trouble. In 2008, Louisiana state government added 3,200 new state employees at an additional cost of $278 million. There was a huge run-up in 2008. We had a 7% increase in our payroll costs in 2008. So part of the problem right now is that big run-up in 2008.
What are they doing? What are those people doing?
Well, they're spread all across state government. I mean, there was just this, the state had a lot of money in 2008. The economy was stimulated by all the money that came in Louisiana to rebuild after the storms. And government that year was allowed to grow. And, you know, you add 7% in 1 year to your payroll costs, that's pretty dramatic. And that $278 million in payroll costs we added, labor costs, in 1 year is bigger than the proposed cut to higher education. So that's a big part of the problem right there.
Yeah, I hope people don't get me wrong. I'm not against state employees. I would just like to know. I was a state employee myself.
I'm a state employee. Yeah. And we've got great state employees. It's not about them. It's about the way we have chosen to organize state government. And this goes all the way back to Governor Huey Long days. You know, the idea of patronage, the idea of the average political appointee in Louisiana state government today, Ted, the average makes $62,000 a year. And on top of that, they most of them, many of them get a car, they get a BlackBerry, they get retirement benefits. I mean, with benefits, the average is $80,000 to $90,000. That's a lot of money in Louisiana. Other states do it with fewer people, with lower labor costs. If Mississippi can do it, or Georgia can do it, I know we can do it.